Welcome to the Sex, God, and Chaos podcast, a conversation built to help you address the mess, connect the dots, and defeat addiction. Doing your work matters because if nothing changes, then nothing changes. Life is tough and we're here to help. I'm your host, Ben Derrick, and as always, I'll be joined by Roan Hunter. Let's jump right in. Roan, here we are.
Once again, we're back.
I wish we had a tally of how many times that's how we started this.
It seems to be pretty consistent. Consistency's good, Ben.
Yeah. I mean, who needs creativity when you can just be consistent?
That's right. Just do the same thing every time.
We do have a variable on this episode today, though, that we're both pretty excited about.
Finally.
Yeah. You have essentially zero influence with your family.
There is no truer statement. There's no doubt.
We have one of your infamous sons with us today.
Yes, we do. We have been trying to get Ro on the podcast for I guess years now, and finally he's here.
What I just want to know. Let's just start here, Ro. What's the aversion? What was the aversion?
To podcasting?
Yes,
to this?
yeah.
I would probably say I don't like either of you. That's the real aversion.
Now I kind of figured that. Yeah. I knew he didn't like me, but I didn't know he didn't like you either.
Yeah. Well,
no aversion.
That's right.
But genuinely speaking, he would tell me, "Hey, we're recording podcasts, and hey, put it on your calendar." And guess what? I didn't do.
Put it on your calendar.
That's right.
Like father, like son.
Same.
We need you to come to the podcast. Like, all right, just tell me when. And either he wouldn't tell me when, or he would tell me when.
True.
And put it on your calendar, and I'll be like, "Yeah, I got it." And then something else comes up, and then here we are.
What I appreciate most is the text that Roan sends me beforehand. It's always the day before, and he says, "Are we on for tomorrow?"
That's our planning.
Yeah, I got that yesterday, and I was like, I mean, the answer is yes, but I don't remember what for.
Very true.
Coffee, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
So what we've done in this intro is really just produced a high level of trust for our listeners.
I can hear the punching of buttons going to the next
episode.
Another whole podcast.
Yeah.
Well, ironically, this intro does let everyone know that we're headed to a specific place about what it means to engage anything, specifically to engage work, though. It's a question that we get a lot, whether it's in intensives or one-on-ones, or even people who are just curious that aren't engaged in counseling at all. They start to ask this question, when you guys say work, what do you mean do your work? What does do your work look like? And for some of it, there's fear there, there's some curiosity. So today we're going to discuss what doing your work, engaging with work actually looks like practically, because there are lots of misconceptions surrounding this idea.
Yeah, we did a previous episode on just do your work, but certainly since Ro has finally joined us, we're going to talk about just some of the practical aspects and just some of the things that we see day in and day out. And then, certainly some of the myths around what it means to do your work. And then even expectations from partners, because that can be a conundrum for sure. So, yeah, we're just going to kind of jump in.
Well, let's take the last first, because this is the one I run into the most, especially when you have a couple sitting in a session, which is kind of a traditional format. There seems to be a lot of expectations that walk into the room, specifically for the one who's been betrayed or hurt or has probably initiated the session in the first place.
Yeah, that is certainly the typical. When a guy shows up in my office, like on his own, he called and made an appointment, maybe just for himself or for he and his wife. I always tell him, like, dude, you're a unicorn. This is rare. This doesn't happen.
And then you brace for impact.
Yeah. And then I look at the wife and go, you have a great husband. And then she's mad right off the bat.
Do you upset wives? Is that what you do?
Never. That's why I try to work with couples with Eva, so she can talk to them as women talk to women. It seems to work much better.
Well, he means well. I understand. You know, he was trying to communicate. Yeah, he means well.
Yeah, you've heard her say that. I know.
Yeah, I have.
I suddenly feel we should stop this episode and start another episode called Behind the Scenes.
That could be a great episode.
That would be, yeah.
Truly. Nobody would ever want to be a counselor. I'll tell you that right now.
Man,
Yeah, only if we do the pastor episode, and you can speak into that.
Right,
yeah.
right.
It's too far in my past. It's all getting cloudy.
I've moved on.
Recovery's working for you.
Exactly. So the partner comes in, often a betrayed partner, usually loaded for bear. There's some expectations. And we have the addition in modernity of social media, which allows everyone to be an expert in everything. So I have the experience where a couple will come in and one part of the couple has a notebook, and they've been taking notes on things that they have heard on social media. And I often think about 10 minutes into the session, what do you need me for?
Yeah.
Right.
Why am I here?
Why? What are we doing? Which is oftentimes how I start most things in that kind of stuff, in that realm of things, where it's like, okay, I understand you're in crisis, or whatever you perceive to be a crisis, but like, what are we going to do about it? What are we doing? What's the meaning of this? Because we're not. I mean, that's one of the biggest misconceptions. You talk about having expectations of the betrayed person that comes in and says, we're going to go to therapy. And a lot of times people, these days especially, treat it like punishment. You know, you've acted out, you've done the wrong thing, you're struggling, and so you're going to marriage therapy with me. And it's like, you get that coming in your office, and one of the misconceptions would be that like, hey, you know, therapists and counselors, we are not miracle workers. I mean, maybe some of us believe ourselves to be that, but like, holy crap.
Yeah, stay away from those people.
Stay away from those people, because if your therapists have a savior complex, they're not going to be able to see your spirit, nor are they going to be able to help your relationship, where it's like, well, now the therapy comes all about the therapist and his or her ability to effectuate change in your marriage, when it's like, no, like no problems ever happen in isolation, and we ain't going to take 1 hour a week and like say, here's what you need to do, and this will all be better. I mean, I wish the world worked like that. That'd be dope. I'd be like making Dr. Phil money. I really would. Which I'm not saying is a bad thing per se. Maybe it is, but like still, that's just not reality. And I think that's something that I mean, like I don't want sometimes to tell the truth, but the truth is you married the wrong person, you know, like you really did. You might be the wrong person for that person too, you know? And I can't tell you how many times I've had to like navigate, you know, trying to not just choose my words wisely, but like help both people understand that like this ain't gonna change tomorrow. It's gonna take years.
Yeah, I think it's often the expectation is like, you know, we're going to take him to therapy, and just like you as Mr. Therapist, you need to fix him. And it just really doesn't work that way.
Well, I think also what we're hovering around is even the expectation that a single hour over the course of a week, no matter what's said in that hour, is going to fix things that happen the other 6 days or the other 6 years or 3 decades. Because we are pursuing it, and it feels like, and I can acknowledge this because I've been on that side of it, it feels like a lot of effort to get to a location, to sit with the person, to wave top and try to describe what's going on. It feels like a lot of effort there, perceived effort, but in actuality, it's such a slim portion of life, that 1 hour.
What was it? It's like 52 weeks in a year or something like that. And if you saw a therapist for 52 weeks, just straight, no breaks, no holidays, nothing. 52 weeks, we're going to do it a whole year of therapy. That's 52 hours. It's a weekend.
Well, and, you know, so often, especially with betrayal, you know, everybody's spinning. The partner is spinning, and there's betrayal trauma. That's very real. And then I'll just use the addict, the actor-outer. He's spinning because, you know, his emotional coping mechanism is now being taken away. It's changing, and so he's got no foundation of how to even work with his own emotions, and then he's trying to help manage the emotions of the other. And that's just about impossible. And so, you've got to work with the crisis. And even in the 52 weeks, so often it's just, especially early on in this process, it's really the fire of the week. And so you're not really getting into the real stuff. They kind of got the marriage or the couple to the place that they got to.
So doing the work obviously includes, from our perspective, an hour a week at least sitting with a professional that has their bearings outside of the dynamics of the relationship. So it's not exclusive of that. It does include it, but it includes many other things. I think that's where my curiosity rests today, to want to be able to document for people listening, because I do believe at their base, there are a lot of people that want to change. They want to get better, but they don't have a very clear understanding of what that looks like because they don't have a guide. I mean, the ability to pursue intervention from counselors and that being normalized in society, that's kind of new, right?
Yeah.
And that's just a small piece of it. So we've got to start through this medium, I think, normalizing other things. What are those other things? I think it's a great place to land here.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, certainly the first thing I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get the guy connected, in a men's group, a good men's group, authentic, real, vulnerable. We're not just focused on stopping the acting out behavior, and that's what so many groups are about, but it's really digging into the deeper issues of attachment, intimacy, vulnerability, empathy, all of those things that we would be as men typically lacking in. And so, I'm trying to get him plugged in to start, getting connected with other guys that are moving in the same direction. And then for the partner, one of the best things for them is to be with other women that have walked the same path. And so those are just the first two practical things that come to mind.
Yeah, the word that came to my mind is attunement. Like that's that's typically the first starting point, especially as a therapist. Like your job really is to just attune. Like you're really trying to kind of hone in on what's behind the eyes there, what's between the lines, if you will. Like I don't know where I heard this, but maybe his body keeps the score. But basically, I think when a couple comes in, especially, or a guy just struggling with any amount of addiction, they want to focus on the issue. They want to deal with the problem. The problem with that statement is that the issues are in the tissues and it has nothing to do with crying. While that does happen, the issues are in your DNA. They're in your brain development, the way you're making choices and seeing the world. So like if a guy is presented to my office and he is so worried about future decisions, his wife, what she's going to do, and dear Lord in heaven, the amount of hours that have probably been spent listening to a guy, or I can't say it was always guys, but it's usually guys, just espousing about, if I just could get her to understand. And then he wants to talk about how to get her to understand. And you have to look those guys in the face and it's like, listen, I don't know your wife. She ain't here. I don't really care to talk about her. I want to know why you want to talk about her, as if you think that's going to do something for you. Same thing, same adage of like, well, most guys really do believe they are connected. That's the crazy part. They really believe that they have some stuff figured out. They really understand directions and they know things and they're a man. And then all of a sudden you're like, yeah, okay, but like, so talk to me just a little bit about your wounds.
And especially here in the South, because they probably go to church and, how many times have you heard, oh yeah, I have a men's group at church or something like that. And what you begin to realize is just, spiritual bypass stuff that's happening, and nothing much is happening there.
No, and it's just spiritual bypass, deflection, all that kind of stuff that presents itself usually in the first session where, a guy, you'll make a statement, you say something like, well, it sounds like you're kind of struggling with like your inadequacy. And they've told you that they were struggling with pornography and masturbation or something. It's like, well, no, there'll be inadequacy. Like, do you think your life is impoverished in some way? No, I'll make a lot of money. I'll have a house. Blah, 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 blah. No, of course not. It's like, okay, well then, like, what is kind of keeping you locked in step with this? And also what's keeping you locked in step with your wife? You know, she's betrayed. She's not safe to you. You know, and like telling that to a guy who's looking for a wife ultimately to be mom and kiss boo-boos, if they're not attuned to that reality that like, oh wait, I'm not really talking about my wife, am I? I'm talking about my mom or my dad or whatever the case may be. And we always go back to childhood and therapy because there's so much that happens that is a result of neglect. And not neglect in the sense that we probably were all raised where like, I mean, you know, 80s, 90s kids, our parents, the ones sitting left to me, we used to have, the boomers, they had to have a reminder, a public service announcement at night, roughly around 8 o'clock that would say, it's 8 o'clock. Where are your children? like
Yes,
that's what raised us. We were raised by sociopaths. That's ultimately. Like, I think about that all the time now where my daughter, who's about to turn 5, I go like, when would there ever be a time period in her life that while she's alive and I'm alive that I wouldn't know where she's at? And why wouldn't I know that, right? Like, but that, so much of that comes from the notion of neglect where we think neglect is like, all right, here's $20, kid, if that. Go play at the park till the sun comes down or something. And now we've not been around our kid, but that's not really, that's neglectful, no doubt. But neglect has more so to do with being seen and attuned to, like where you are you emotionally neglected, you know? And I think that's one of the biggest barriers to guys doing the quote unquote work. They're simply not attuned at all to what it means to be seen, you know, and they come to a therapist and if you've never done it before and you've not been exposed and been vulnerable and having to deal with this dark passenger or the dark side of yourself or whatever, it's a little intimidating. It's like a whoa, he's like seeing me. Like he gets it. I don't like this. I'd rather go hide. Mm-hmm. And the reality of that is like, that's what your wife has been experiencing the first moment she met you. You know, she's picked up on this notion that you're not jiving. And that's where she's kind of either trying to motivate you to change in some capacity where you would say that she's nagging or something like that, or she's fully shutting down emotionally, physically, sometimes spiritually. And I think that's one of the craziest things for a dude to realize. Like, and you go as a therapist, you watch this happen, and it's kind of jarring. Or you're like, oh God, you didn't see this for that long? Oh, it's so sad. Like you've been so depleted of life.
I would hope you have a better poker face in session than that.
I really don't. That's why people don't stop coming to see me, where I'm just like, oh God, you suck.
I'm so glad you're here.
I'm so glad you're here.
Always be yourself unless you suck.
Well, you bring up something pretty critical that I've experienced as a barrier from the client. The client puts this barrier up. It's almost an eye roll. If you start to ask questions related to origination, you know, the family of origin, or tell me about your relationship with, they almost sit back on the couch like, oh, here we go, you know.
You're going to want me to talk about how bad my dad is. My dad's awesome. You know, he owns a dealership, so he's cool, man. Yeah. He's cool.
I look back at that guy and I say, oh my gosh, you got the one? You got the only one? Man, that is like the golden ticket.
Amazing.
So a certain level of cynicism for sure is there. But I think part of doing the work, we have to say this, is being willing to go back further than you want to go. In fact, I'll often try to push the client, where's that point of resistance? If you'll talk to me about the first part of your marriage or how great college was or your senior year, I'm like, all right, we got to push back further, because they have put up a barrier between that uncomfortable part of their life and what they're willing to talk about with me. And usually that's the stuff we actually need to be discussing. So for me, I have to spend an inordinate amount of time saying, look, this is how it went for me. Yeah. And you compress the story a little bit, but you give them permission to come out. And this is where we use words like we are naming, we're not blaming, we're not looking back to judge, we're just looking back to evaluate. And then goodness knows they'd be mind blown if they knew there was like a adverse childhood experiences test, you know?
You could take this test.
Yeah, that's right. As a big predictor, you know, but this stuff has been figured out for a long time. Yeah. But we, especially I would say as men, push against that part of the work. Like, don't make me talk about those painful things in my past. I've slept since then. I've developed coping mechanisms, and I think I was working with a client this week. I believe that you want to grow. You're just scared to death to let go of that coping mechanism because you don't trust yourself without it, right? And everything's short circuited at that point. Exactly. At that point, but I mean, this is a huge part of the work. Don't you agree?
100%.
Totally.
Yeah. Well, you talk about the person resisting growth, like makes me think, since I'm still kind of at the end of the season of Toddlerville, of my daughter, getting rid of her passy. I mean, she was attached to that passy. I mean, it was her nice soother. It was a great thing for her to go to sleep. And we, as parents, we know you have to kind of get rid of the passy. You can't be doing that at all for a lot of different reasons, not just the obvious ones. So trying to be creative to get her to put the passy down and to recognize that, like, you have to, like, change. What we came up with was telling her a story that if you bury the passy in the dirt, what will arise? The passy fairy will come and she will sprinkle fertilizer. And then out of that, maybe a lollipop or whatever those cake pop things are at Starbucks, which I think is what we landed on because she loves those. So we the one night we did it, because we had tried other things. She wouldn't sleep. She's fussing. She's screaming. One night we did it, and that was my wife's idea. Like, all right, we're going to get in there, just sneak in there, grab the passies and put the little lollipops in there. And she wakes up the next morning, comes running into our room. The fairy came. Daddy, Mommy, look, the fairy came. I don't need my passy anymore. In a sense, it's very cute and it's amazing, and she's moved on or whatever. But like, this in a nutshell is what it means to grow and change. Like, you have to have wonder. You have to have this ability to create and be imaginative. Now I sound like Phil Harden right now, but you have to have the ability to literally
wait. Pause. Something's gone terribly wrong.
We've gone off the edge.
And I don't know if you know this about men. The typical man, not the most creative guy. Creative at getting, stuff done and getting, your jollies off, but like not very creative in thinking of like, how do I want to see myself? Like what do I want to experience my life to be? And I keep watching this. I've literally turned into my father, because now at night I am falling asleep to World War II documentaries where it's just like, how did that happen? Like, I don't plan to do that.
Finally.
Yeah, it's like, I keep watching this I'm trying to power through it, but I can't, because I either fall asleep or I cry, because it's so just sad. And it's a D-Day documentary about, 10 or 11 guys or so who basically just never told their story. They've literally never talked about D-Day. They never talked about it with their kids or their grandkids or a therapist, and that's the reality of their lives, is like they're now 80, 90 years old, and they really have not explored that particular area of their lives. And one of the guys talks about what that's been like for him, of having to live in this shell, this compartment, and trying to feel joy, and like his experience of his life has been kind of null. I mean, he's had a good life, but he can't help but see this face of the soldier that saved his life or something. And he is wildly disattuned. You can just hear it. And as a therapist, it's probably, the luxury that I have of literally peering behind the curtain of what it looks like to be disattuned. Because if you saw him and you listened to it, you think, he got through it. He survived. And you just look at him. He's like on the beach of Normandy, grabbing the sand and like literally holding it up and saying like, well, there's no more blood here. No more blood. And you think about that and you're like, oh God, like that's what hijacked his creativity. That's what hijacked his imagination. It was his trauma. And that's ultimately what trauma does to us. We ruminate on these things over and over and over again about the bad things that were done to us or said to us or whatever. And we're looking for new data to like give a defense to it, but that's the problem with it. Is past. It's gone. It's not coming back. You can't go backwards. You can't do it. The only thing to do is to understand it. And I think that's something that I hear all the time of like, I don't get why I do what I do. I don't understand it, man. I don't get it. It's like, well, I can't cuss, but like, no crap, Sherlock. Like, dude, like if we don't understand something as men, what replaces that is fear, you know? And if there was ever a great feeling to describe the devil, it would be that. It's just fear. You know, you can't really be afraid of change. And yet, that's what wanders people into our office. People, it's just like, I got to change now. I got to do it. My wife's going to leave me or whatever the case may be.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, it's like, the motivator is always when the pain of change becomes greater than the pain of same, right? And so because it's going to take effort, it's going to take work, and that's what we talk about. You got to do the work. And so often, I believe, and you said it, Ro, the aversion to it is fear and shame.
Yeah.
And and in some ways, it's scary to give up the passy, whatever the passy is, and then but I've got to not just give up the passy, I've got to replace it with the Starbucks cake pop, whatever that is.
We got to do something.
Yeah,
with it.
I've got to find something that is better, that is legitimate, that is not destructive. Yeah. And Dallas Willard always talks about the principle of misdirection. I can't just stop about I've got to stop doing this behavior. Well, the misdirection is I've got to move in this direction and to begin to do these things where, life becomes a whole lot better. And you have to have models for that. And that's the part of the idea of just, connections. Because it takes we believe that it takes a corrective relational and emotional experience in order for the bad stuff to heal. Yeah. That's the only way it works.
And think about what you're saying, too, in terms of the gospel, because, what I experience a lot with people is that buddy, do we believe? We believe. The problem, though, is the way you're using the belief, where it's like you trying to get Jesus to avoid the pain, to avoid the darkness, to literally do the spiritual Jesus juke, as you say, or the bypass, to misdirect in that way. When I think the gospel is really designed to heal things. You're supposed to look at yourself with a better reward, which would be forgiveness, And so many guys live in isolation and they don't see it that way. They don't look at themselves that way of deserving of forgiveness because you told early on, even though you got the Imago Day, hey, buddy, you born into a fallen world. Have you repented yet? Have you sinned? Have you believed with your blah, blah, whatever. And while on the surface, that is probably a wonderful intent. The destruction of that kind of ideology or thinking is that now you've given yourself the ability to go around you. And that's what we see often in the work, quote unquote, is that, hey, you have spent the majority of your life literally going around yourself, and now you can't outrun yourself. Now you're here. Now you must see exactly as you are. And I feel like what I'm saying, it takes a very courageous person to be able to come and sit down. And so when you have a wife who is hurt and betrayed and angry, and you as a therapist are now showing empathy to this guy who is effed up and he's done the wrong thing and he's mean and he's whatever the names you want to throw at him.
Narcissist.
There you go. Of course. Always.
That's TikTok narcissist.
That's right. The blessing and curse of TikTok. Good Lord. But it's true. As soon as you start talking like I'm talking, I'm like, well, hey, dude, the gospel's right here. You're forgiven. No, he's not. He's not. No, what are you talking about forgiven? That's not, we're not doing that. Well, if we're not going to start there in our marriage, well, he needs to be held accountable, no doubt. He needs to account for what he did. But if we're not going to start with this attitude of a willingness to change something, you can't change out of fear. It doesn't work that way. Just reinforces the idea that I need to I need a worse passy if I'm afraid. I need to go back to the passy. Yeah. I'm too scared. It's okay. Well, fear's okay. Fear gives us the opportunity to be courageous, to be brave. Yeah,
and then you throw the shame on top of it that certainly the addict is feeling. And then, those shame messages go deep to the core. They go all the way back to childhood. It formed, it's our belief system, a false belief system, the false self. And, that's part of what we've been acting out. And so uncovering that, unpacking that, an hour a week is
It just ain't gonna cut it.
just probably not going to get us where
I mean,
we
I
wanna
wouldn't
go.
even care. I wouldn't even call an hour a week bare minimum. I
Yeah.
like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't. Technically it is,
Yeah.
because you are going to a therapist. But we all been to therapy in this room. Like, how effective is an hour a week? Like,
Not very.
not very.
Yeah.
Not
Well,
very.
and then, it's not just even the family of origin, what you grew up in, it's generational in your DNA. Because when you start going back on the previous generation, what you're going to see is just, there was addictions gone wild and dysfunction junction. And the great news is that goes all the way back to the very beginning in the Genesis story, right? Yeah. And every one of those families and our patriarchs of our faith, holy cow. Yeah. I mean, it was just absolutely, just dysfunction junction. Yeah. And, God just gives us a picture of like, okay, I still love these people. I'm going to use these people. And there were consequences to those things. However, that dysfunction, the dysfunctional behaviors are really the things that are passed on to the second, third, fourth, forever generations until somebody decides, I'm going to do this different.
Yeah. And think about what you're saying too in terms of Papa, my illustrious grandfather,
my dad,
who's a World War II veteran too, mind you.
That book he wrote, Crap My Dad Says.
Right.
Can I say shit, or are you going to edit it out?
It just depends on how I'm feeling that day.
Edit. Eva won't be happy. Yeah.
But that, what you're saying is really true, not just from the beginning of Genesis, but like even again, since I've been watching this dang documentary, it made me cry every night. Like, those guys coming back, they're expected to be normal. They're expected to be living the American dream that they fought for. They're expected to be a dad, a husband, a father, whatever. They're expected to go back to whatever it is before. And like, I don't know if you guys ever talked to some warriors. Like, they ain't no going back. There's no going after that. Is nothing in it. The uniqueness now versus the uniqueness then is that that's not 10,000 people. That's not 20,000 people. That is an entire cohort, millions of people across the world, not just here in America. It's easy to pick on us, but like across the world that come back with what we would refer to as complex PTSD, to where now we have to make sense of it. And now we have to figure out why. I mean, we know why, but like, why though? Like evil's always existed, but why this? Why that? Why would nuclear? Why? What? All these questions that I don't know if you have experienced the 1950s in history. I haven't, but I've read about it. Not exactly the most attuned people, those people in the 50s. I know my grandfather, and that was when he was, at the apex of his life. And would you say he's a tuned person?
Very, very attuned. Yes.
He was a loving grandfather. And I really mean that. I'm not so sure he was a loving father. He wasn't my dad, but he loved in his own way. But that entire set of people are so limited in how they could love in the depths that they could because of the things that were happening, that happened to them, as well as the society at the time where it's just not really copacetic or kosher to really talk about your stuff.
Yeah, he's a great example. I always say his love bucket had about an ounce in it, and that's what he had, and I got every ounce of it.
You got all the ounce.
I know that for a fact, but I know a little bit of his backstory and like what he grew up in.
Yeah.
Gosh, he looked like, Mr. Rogers compared to his dad and how he fathered us. And again, the bar was low, but the effects of the dysfunction that he grew up in were tremendous in his life and just emotionally surviving.
And even too, like even from a bigger picture of that for him, especially like he's born in what, 23?
Yeah,
something like that?
Child of the Depression.
Right, in the Great Depression. Now, that's why they're called the Greatest Generation. It's not because they just won the war, that helps, but it's because all those people the fought in that war, they're born in like the most abject poverty. They're born into like the Mississippi Delta, but everywhere. Like truly sad and very hard times. I remember Papa, when he was alive, would talk to me about that when I lived with him when I was in college for like a semester or two. And he would talk about like, I remember watching Oh Brother We're Out. That was a true story. We're watching Oh Brother We're Out, though, me, him, and my grandmother. And we're sitting there, and there's that scene in Oh Brother We're Out there where they go up and, it's like we're kin to whatever, and they have to slaughter the horse to eat. And, I'm laughing about that. And I asked Papa the question, like, y'all don't have to kill no horses to eat back then. He was like, oh, it was worse. We thought about killing the dog, the cat, the rabbit, the whatever. Anything that we had, we would think about eating it. And I was like, I never experienced that.
Yeah.
I don't know how I'd deal with that.
That has its effect.
That has an effect on you.
I love what we're pointing out here, not so subtly, is the fact that we don't think this way as people.
No.
We're very myopic. Like if there's a problem, and especially if we're in a marriage, we got two options. Either I'm the problem or they're the problem, right? But the problem actually might not be present in the room. The problem actually might not still be alive where the problem originated. So going back, even as soft as we were presenting it earlier, going back to my own childhood, I would say if we're really talking about doing the work, even that's not enough.
Yep.
You're not going to find the bottom, when you're 6 years old.
Right.
It's something that happened before that, happened before that most likely happened before that. We call it on this podcast the setup, right?
Yeah.
So there's kind of like the micro setup for certain things, and there's the macro setup for certain things. What we're discussing now is the macro setup, the greatest generation, also the silent generation.
Yeah.
And I would propose for those of us that are in our 40s, our mid 40s, I think some of this is changing, although slowly. But for those of us in our mid 40s, I mean, we are often directionless because we had no guide, because the person who was supposed to be our guide also did not have a guide other than you should work and then you should probably work.
Yeah, right.
I mean, that's it. And look, I think
drink
work, I think work is a great thing. Well, part of working is drinking, right?
Yes, all
and part of working is making sure you don't communicate with your wife. That's the other part.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, don't talk to her.
Don't talk to her. Things will go all kinds of sideways if you do that, right? But I think just to help people who are listening wrap their minds around the fact, this is a very large palette of things to review, to think about, to be curious about, to use your imagination over. How would that maybe have affected my relationship with my current spouse, or my relationship with my job, or my relationship to failure or fun or adventure? I mean, we're just listing a few things right now, but you could literally spend an entire year just thinking about the thing that we're talking about right now, which again is only a portion of the work, right?
Yeah.
And it's something that Myers-Briggs or the Enneagram or whatever latest thing that's come out, that's not the golden ticket.
No.
Yeah.
No.
And changing therapists isn't the golden ticket. And changing spouses isn't the golden ticket.
EMDR.
That's it.
Yeah.
You got it.
EMDR.
Hey, for some people, it is. I've seen it be effective. That's not the case for everybody. And I've seen lots of people that have done EMDR, lots of it, and basically there's no change in behavior.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
This is all the rage.
Oh, yeah.
But they're less reactive and they're a little bit more calm.
I'd like to make a point
But
here
not
that
really.
I'm not sure if this will be a popular point, but I think, Ro, getting back to one of your original points, this is a distraction
Yeah.
to the actual work.
Yeah.
Like if we're going to sit down and talk about theories or the latest book that you read, and you can just chameleon your way through an entire hour.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, that's great. I already know more about this than you do, but thanks for informing me and paying me to give me, kind of a mediocre lesson in the Enneagram. But see you next week, right?
See you next.
Yeah. So I've learned actually to interrupt, and I'm young in this career path, but I've learned to interrupt and say, we've been talking about the Enneagram for 35 minutes now. Like what? I mean, I'm glad that this made an impact, but I'd really rather talk about your story and what's going on today than, all the intricacies of being a 6 married to a 9 wing whatever.
Yeah. And it's like what you're saying, it's just like we wear these fancy suits, you know, like these flesh suits, these big, nice, fancy things that keep this thing inside. You know, a good therapist, here's another misnomer about the work. A good therapist interrupts. A good therapist can see you. They literally, you can't chameleon. A good therapist can attune to it very quickly. And they'll let you talk for about 30 minutes or whatever. And then all of a sudden it's like,
Okay.
if you mention one more word about Bryson DeChambeau, like we're going to have to.
Wait, that's okay. Now you're meddling. Yeah.
Well, I say that.
I've had great sessions
It
about
also works
Bryson.
the other way too, where that's why I mentioned him, because he won the U.S. Open, and I'm now a huge fan.
We're going to get him on the podcast.
I used to not like Bryson. I used to think he was a
but
showboat.
he's changed.
He's changed big time. Big
People
time.
change.
Big time. Or he's got a great PR team. Either way, change has happened. So I mentioned that because
Ron, you need a PR team.
I was just thinking, I need to find out who they are.
Seriously, they work for Bryson.
Well, yeah, Eva will definitely be calling them.
That's the 100% fact right there.
Okay, let's take a quick turn here because we're running just a little bit short on time. I want to touch on this because we just have to. My position is that a good therapist is willing to offend.
Yeah. Amen.
Yeah.
I don't feel like that is the public's perception.
No.
How do we get past this? Let's at least talk about it for a few minutes as we wrap today.
Well,
I could talk
being
for
the
6
expert
hours
on offending people, I think you have to. I mean, the only way you're going to change is like somebody speaking into your blind spots, into your unawareness. And, you know, sometimes I hope I do that compassionately, but sometimes you just have to be direct, especially working with men. I don't work with women individually. I mean, I certainly am fortunate to get to see behind the curtain and working with couples, but I always say I've got one woman I've been married to for over 40 years, and I haven't figured her out yet. What good is it going to do me to sit and talk to a woman? That's Eva's job, right? At least for me, it works. But I think it's just, especially with men, that just, you know, being direct. But you're absolutely right. The kind of the misconception, and oftentimes people have been to see other therapists that just blow smoke up your skirt. Can I say that? That's probably I probably offended somebody.
Half the world has no idea what you mean.
Yeah,
But
that's right. Yes,
we do.
Butter your toast. I don't know.
Butter your toast.
Whatever. That just basically they're affirming your feelings, and you know you're just living out of your feelings, and they just join that. And man, that's a waste of time and money.
It is. Like, especially when you go with the feeling routes of things. While feelings are important, and like they really do need to feel feelings, and you do need help pointing them out, like just staying in your feels doesn't really give any amount of direction. It really doesn't. You can learn to trust yourself a little bit better if you can kind of tolerate some of your bad feelings or whatever's going on. However, you know, you don't always need to trust yourself, because sometimes your thoughts are not exactly your friend. And so I tell that to people all the time. Like, are you aware that like you're not your thoughts? And they're like, what do you mean? Yes, I am. Like, no. They're just thoughts. They're just feelings that come and go. They're assessments of whatever it is you're experiencing. They're not exactly real, in the same way like the internet is not real. Yes, it is. Where is it? I'll touch it. I want to feel the internet. I want to feel it around me or something. And that's a stupid, and it literally is a fantasy. And I think what you're saying about being offensive, being like this whole like, hey, I see you, I'd get you, I'm gonna interrupt you, I'm gonna coach you, we're gonna do things. I think it even goes back to like you say, how do we normalize going to a therapist that offends? And that's kind of what it's for. You normalize that by kind of allowing a person, any person, to first, when they come into your office, just tell my story. Tell your story. Go ahead. Let's hear it. What you struggling with? And then you keep letting them tell their story over and over and over again. And then by about the 4th or 5th session, after they've talked about themselves and their story for like 4 hours, that's when we kind of want to go, hey, enough. Stop talking about yourself. What? Huh? What are you talking about? No, we don't. We're not here to talk about yourself. What are you talking about? See, whatever it is that you were cannot be. And whatever it is you're going to be, you've yet to find out. So we need to talk about being wildly you. Who is you? What is you? Why are you? How are you? You know, these are questions that you would spend an enormous amounts of your upbringing and young years trying to avoid. You really would rather have somebody else tell you what you are. And that's where the real offense comes, where it's like, well, it's offensive for me to tell you exactly who you are, for me to diagnose you. That should be offensive. For me to literally go, hey, do you have these symptoms? Okay, got that. All right, what I have assessed in my little tool book here is that you are depressed. You're depressed. Next. Like, what good is any of that? You know, a good therapist is one that points out the things that you probably should be offended on. You should never be offended by getting feedback, you know, by being scrutinized, because it's like a good thought experiment that I like to do with especially kids or teenagers of like, all right, you have beliefs, right? Yes, I do. I have a lot of beliefs. Okay, of your beliefs that you've come to experience in your 15 years of life, how many of your beliefs do you actually think are true? 100% true. Like 100%. Yeah, I don't know. You don't know? Do you care if they're true or not? Do you care if your beliefs are true? Do you care? Well, yeah, I get. I'm supposed to, right? Well, you better. You should, of course, you know. But could you concede at all that maybe some of your beliefs, maybe all of them, are wrong? Or are they like bad? 50-50. 50-50. Okay. Well, would you know if a belief is true? And that's so funny to watch kids these days try and figure out, you know, well, I read about it. It's in the Bible. It's on my phone. My mom told me, whatever. And it's like, well, no. Things are true because they pass the test of scrutiny. Like you can literally, you can share reality, you know, and reality ain't in you. It's literally outside of you. You're just experiencing it. So like, to be normalizing the offensive of a therapist, it's like we are here to challenge. We are here to push. We're here to nurture when need be, but we're not. I mean, that's what I tell clients all the time. Like, hey, I am willing to go down the darkness with you. I will go down that cave. We'll spend time splunking and get down into super weird. We might even run into Gollum. Who knows? We'll get a ring and get out of here. The difference is you can stay in the cave. That's up to you. I don't care. You can stay in the cave. I got a rope out of it, and you're welcome to join me if you want. But I'm not making you. You know.
Well, and you know, certainly I always reference in the Bible when Jesus is talking to Nicodemus.
Oh yeah.
And you know, he's the teacher of the law. He's the man, right? He knows it all. He's got it all. And Jesus is looking at him, and he's like, I think Jesus talked this way. He's like, dude, you don't get it, man.
I know someone else that talks like that too. Weird.
It's like, you don't get it. All this stuff that you learned that you thought was going to get you somewhere, closer to God, to somewhere, it doesn't work. And you've got to unlearn all of that and then relearn like a little child.
Yeah.
In order to change and do it different. I mean, that's what he's saying.
Yeah.
And boy, you know, and of course that's where we get the bastardized term born again and that gets stupid in church world. But that's what he's speaking to, is this idea of change. Yeah. And all that false belief, all that the stuff that you were told and taught that has gotten you where you are, that's got to be, you got to do it different. Sure. And then you get into the practical, right? There, you know, oftentimes it's like, yeah, we figured out, you know, mama quit breastfeeding you too soon, whatever. I mean, whatever those things are, they're there, and that's part of the work. But then the question is, okay, what are you willing to do, and what will you actually do to change?
Mm-hmm. I think it's a great question. It's also a great place for us to pause this episode and pick back up next time with what is the part of offense in growth? I think that's going to be a good episode.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so stay tuned. We'll be back next time with that information. To learn more about what you've heard today and to engage with the Sex, God, and Chaos team, visit sexgodchaos.com. LifeWorksCounseling.com.